everybody. Sorry, there was a quick moment where the Q and Amaco intro showed up. Sorry about that. Hi, Sherry from Arkansas. So, welcome to Glazing with Amaco. I'm Kara, and today's topic, I'm going to cover some other things as well, but today's topic is the Satin Matte line, the Amaco Satin Mattes. So the Satin Matte line is has a variety of colors. They're all mixable. There was at a time a couple of colors that were not really mixable with the rest, but we've managed to change that formulation. So the red and orange, as well as all of the other Satin Matte colors, are fully mixable. They are all food safe, and they come in a variety of beautiful colors. So I've used them to make pastels. I also have found a few layering combinations with them that I think are really lovely. Hi, Jennifer. And sorry, I'm going to adjust my windows here so I can see everything. And so I found a few combinations that I think are really beautiful, and I've tried out some different stuff. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have done with the Satin Mattes. And the first one that I'm going to share with you, hang on, there we go. This is the mug that you saw on the opening card, and this is Satin Matte Black, SM1 Black, with, you're probably not going to be, you might be surprised, this is with PC43 Toasted Sage. And so it does come out kind of a greeny beige with sort of pinkish highlights where it's very thick. So I have had some people ask about the Satin Mattes. They are more satin than matte. Hi, Hi, Camille. It's good to see you. So the Satin Mattes are more satiny than matte. They are very silky feeling. I really love the sensation of them. They're not matte in the sense of being dry. They're just not shiny glossy. So you can also, instead of using PC43, another option for more green color would be PC44 Sage. PC43 Toasted Sage and PC44 Sage are very, very similar glazes. The only real difference is that 44 Sage is going to be more green. Toasted Sage 43 is going to be more of a purpley, pinkish kind of color with a little bit of green. It's kind of a grayish color. So for today's glazing, I have my Satin Matte Black. I had to get a new jar because I was out. I used up the last of my Satin Matte Black making this mug. So just like whenever I'm glazing, a little separated. That's okay. Stir it up a bit. Hi, Kathleen. So I really love the Satin Mattes because they are just soft and silky. They're super stable. They do not run. Some matte glazes, just because it's a matte glaze does not mean it's stiff, and I have seen some beautiful matte glazes that will run like the dickens even while they are matte. So this is actually a very, very stable, stiff glaze. I frequently take it up to cone 6. It doesn't change. In fact, this mug is fired to cone 6. I know they really, so Camille's asking, what temperature cone do the Satin Mattes like? They do best at cone 5, but I've fired them at cone 6 without any problems. So I would say if you're firing to cone 6, go ahead and fire them to cone 6. If you're firing to cone 5, go ahead and use them at cone 5. I'm going to put some inside. these mugs with these beautiful textured bottoms and kind of soft feet. David Bunch, who some of you know from Brickyard, and some of you may know from our TikTok and Instagram account. He threw these. They're really gorgeous.
Thanks.
You're welcome, David. I don't think you guys heard that. He said thanks. But he does really beautiful throne work. So he did these for us to use in our show. And now that I've gotten the outside, I'll do the inside. And those of you who know how I glaze, you know that I apply pretty generously, pretty thickly. If you can hear your brush making contact with your cup, you probably need a little more glaze on there. Your brush should never drag. It should be nice and fluid coats. And I find that being able to do it quickly means I can kind of smooth out those coats without adding more glaze. So I'm going to put that to the side for a moment. Let that dry. Camille, I'm not sure 2170 or 2180, which one is more ideal than the other. I think that depends on the speed of your firing and what your cones show. So you should test that out. So for my other project, I wanted to show you guys, let me set that aside for a moment. I'm going to come back to my selfie cam for a moment. And another thing that I love doing with the satin mattes is using the semi-moist underglaze on top of the raw glaze. So this was entirely glazed inside and out with the satin matte white. Another thing that sometimes people ask about, is about matte glazes staining. Now I drink tea every day, and I drink tea out of this mug probably 2 to 3 times a week. I like it a lot because it fits into the cup holder in my car. And you can, I've had this for I think about 4 or 5 years, at least 4 years, and I think closer to 5, maybe even 6 years, that I've been drinking tea out of this mug at least once a week, if not more. And you may be able to see it is not stained. It is slightly discolored around the edges, but I think that that's mostly because my dishwasher needs some work. But I painted this with smugs on top of the raw glaze, and I'm going to show you how I did that. And then another sample of kind of things that can be done. I was just playing, trying out some different things. And this is, again, the satin matte white, and then smugs painted over, and the black lines are actually velvet, ultra black velvet, painted on with an applicator. So you can see how it still has that matte surface. It's really silky, but it has a lot of color in it, really rich. So I'm going to show you how I did that with this cake stand. Greetings, Catherine from Arizona, and Moose Bunny from California. I like that name. I'm wondering what a moose bunny would look like. Is it like a jackalope, maybe?
Like a jackalope, but different.
A bigger version of a jackalope. So I have my white satin matte, and now for a cake stand, now I do not know, these smugs are food safe when they are underneath a food safe glaze. But I do not know if they are food safe when they are on top of a food safe glaze. And we have not had them tested for that use. So my preference is to use them on non-food surfaces. Just an FYI. So there's one coat of white glaze. what I could do is put some satin mattes on top. And I have also, like I said, I've mixed satin mattes. You can layer them. I would be careful about getting too thick if you're layering. I haven't had any trouble with layering them, but I'm going to leave the base for later. For now, I'm just going to do the sides. So that one coat already has dried very quickly. This bisque is extremely dry. So I'm going to, like a bunny with moose antlers. Yeah, that's it, exactly. Just like a jackalope, but with moose antlers. So there's my second coat of the Satin Matte White. I'm going to come back and go across the top. And then I'm going to let that dry. And while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to go back to my black mug. Set that there. Set that there. Come back to my black mug and get a second coat on. So have any of you used the Satin Matte glazes, the Amaco Satin Matte glazes, and what did you like or not like about them? What were your thoughts about them, and what were the colors that you tried out? My favorite is actually the blue-green. It's really rich color. Jason says, I need a bigger studio to fit all your glazes. Is that it? Or just to fit all of the wonderful work you're making? So, there we go. Susan says, I love the satin mattes. I wish you had a brown color. I hope that we can some more colors for the satin mattes. They are such a beautiful line, and it would be lovely to have a nice brown, wouldn't it? So there's my second coat. I'm going to scoot that out of the way. You may notice I use my brush to move my glazed pieces around. It's a lot easier, and then I don't have to worry about getting glaze on myself. So Evelyn says, I used the Satin Matte Clear over an underglaze design, and it is a favorite mug because it feels so silky. Yes, it does, doesn't it? It's just so lovely. Rachel says, I used the Satin Matte Black, and it had a blue tone to it that I didn't really like. I used the blue-green layered under some other glazes, and it turned out very cool. I'm glad to hear that. We had a point about 3 years ago where the satin matte was coming out more navy blue, but usually if your satin matte is coming out more blue, it may be overfired or it may not be enough coats. So try looking at your firing and try looking at your coats. Jason says, last time I was at Brickyard, I looked closer at the SM series. I buy jet black velvet underglaze by the gallon, and it doesn't look much different than SM. Well, Jason, if you're firing it to cone 5, the jet black does flux a little bit, but it's going to be a little bit drier than the satin matte. The satin matte is going to be more velvety. And because it is a glaze rather than an underglaze, sorry, there was a thick spot right there, because it's a glaze, it is going to be more economical because it uses less stain because of the melt. But keep in mind, you can buy the velvets by the gallon. You cannot buy the satin mattes by the gallon. That might be something that we're looking at in the future, but not yet. created by Shauna says, I love the satin mats. Chartreuse, light blue, dark blue, and white work well for bright, fun mix and match pieces. Dark blue works well with indigo float. Oh, I haven't tried that one. Sapphire float and or honey flux accents for layers over it. I haven't tried the dark blue with honey flux or any of the layering. I might have to try that out. Hi, Susan says, hi, Kara. And CP No-Till says, I love Aribe. Yes, Aribe is so silky. And it has more visual texture. It is more like a pottery glaze. And it has so much like light and dark variation to it. It's really, really lovely. So that's my third coat.
Are we gonna touch on the mixability?
I did mention it. David was asking if I'm going to talk about the mixability, and I have a video from a couple of years ago where I talked about mixing the satin mattes. I was making a pink, so I made kind of a corally deep pink with the red satin matte and the white satin matte. So I mixed them half and half, and it came out a very strong pink. So I'm not going to get into that so much today. I'm going to put the toasted sage down here for a moment. And while those are drying, I wanted to mention someone was asking about iron luster. So a few weeks back, I did a video on iron luster and oatmeal layering, and I did demo a cup, and this is, I'm pretty sure this is the cup that I glazed in the demo. So it is 3 coats of iron luster and 1 coat of oatmeal, and both of these are the newest batches that we had available at the time. They were extremely new. And I do notice that the iron luster, in the past year, the gum solution, we went with a newer gum solution, and it does make the glazes a little bit more runny. And I've talked about this before, runny when you're applying them. So it can be difficult to get the same thickness of application because they tend to not clump up on your brush so much. But this was 3 coats of iron luster and 1 coat of oatmeal, and it made this beautiful dark purple. It was fired to cone 6. It did run a little bit. That shows that I went a little thick with the iron luster. But for someone who was asking me today and saying that their iron luster was looking different, I'm finding the iron luster still has that gray-green float, but it may need to be applied heavier than what you have been accustomed to. Not that you need to apply more glaze, but it may take more coats. So it's the same amount of glaze, but because the viscosity is lower, it may feel like you're applying more. We are not adding more water. We did not change the water content in any of our glazes, but the gum solution has a dispersant effect. So it does make the glazes feel like they are more watery. So I know what you're talking about, but they're not actually more watery. Now for this mug, compared to this mug, I did do 3 coats on the inside of the mug of the satin matte black and just 2 coats on the outside. But in the interest of getting these to dry a little bit more, I might just go ahead and put that 3rd coat. Yeah, I'm going to put that 3rd coat on the inside now. Evelyn says, I love Julianne Roche's work. She uses mostly Amaco Satin MAtte glazes. Yes, I've seen her videos, and aren't those lovely? And she is also layering them over underglazes. Isn't that correct? Karen asks, what combos would you suggest with Oribe? The satin Oribe, I can't think off the top of my head. I'm going to have to go back and look at some of our combinations. I know that satin Oribe can be really runny if you layer it, so you need to be careful when you're combining it with other things. So I'll have to look at that after we get back from, after I am offline. So let me see. My white, I think, is all done, so I'm going to clean that brush up. You'll notice that as I go, once I'm done with a brush, it goes into water, and then when I'm done with my glazing, I clean all my brushes. And yes, I do have multiple brushes. It makes glazing a lot faster to have multiple brushes instead of having to wash between each and every one. Jason asks, aren't all the satin matte glazes opaque? Would velvets affect the appearance much? And actually, the satin mattes are kind of semi-opaque. They're not purely opaque. In fact, I'll tell you something, one of my favorite combos is actually just the satin matte white over, or chartreuse actually looks really great this way too, on a speckled clay body. So if you're using a clay body that has manganese speckles in it, use one of the satin mattes over, like white or chartreuse or yellow, and you will see those specks through the color, and it's really, really beautiful. So that's one of my fun tips for using the satin mattes. So they are not really totally opaque. If you want a more opaque look, you can apply them a little heavier. I know some people have had trouble with getting it even, but they generally look pretty good, just a normal 3-coat. That's still too wet for me to use. So I'm going to talk about the smug. Set that aside. Set that aside. I'm going to talk about the smugs for a moment. And some of you have seen these before. I show them frequently. The semi-moist underglaze decorating colors, which here at Amaco we call them smugs for short, for semi-moist underglaze. And you'll see them listed as underglaze watercolors. So these are underglaze watercolors. They are different than regular underglazes. They are meant to dry out. And my trick for using them is about 5 to 10 minutes before I'm ready to use a color. I think I'm going to use red and some light blue and some gray. I want to use some light green too, but I'll just have to go back and do that later. So the trick with them is I have an applicator with some water. You don't need to have an applicator. You can just use your brush. And I put some water on the pan and let it sit for about 10 minutes. And that softens it up so that it lifts easily and is more opaque. If you just put a wet brush on it and try to scrub it, you won't get a lot of color and you will wreck your brushes. So I recommend you getting a little bit of water and then letting it sit. And when your glaze, your raw glaze, so this is just white glaze, when your glaze is dry to the touch, you can start applying the underglaze. So, any questions about doing this? I know that a lot of you have seen me do this before with the underglazes. And this is a cake dish. I do a lot of octopi. I'm kind of feeling a little odd about doing an octopus on a cake dish, but I like doing octopus, tentacles and such. So I think that's actually what I'm going to do here is go ahead and do the octopus. Now, keep in mind, you can always use a graphite pencil, like a regular number 2 pencil, to draw out a design. I'm just going to kind of freeform. freehand it. Octopus. CP No-Till says, Karen, I like Ancient Copper with Aribe and also Black Walnut by another company. The overlap turns metallic. That's good to know. I wouldn't overlap Ancient Copper with Aribe, but I bet they look absolutely spectacular next to each other. Do you actually overlap them? So that is pretty much, I just paint like I'm painting watercolor. And the raw glaze absorbs the underglaze just like if you were painting with watercolor on paper. And I generally start with my lightest areas first and then work my way into darks. And you can get quite saturated colors with this. Now these have a lot more stain than a typical underglaze. If you try this with something like the LUGs or the velvets, you might end up with a more dry surface than what you get with using the smugs. And I also like using chalks on stuff like this. But the satin mattes are just so lovely for this because they are super, super stiff, and since they're matte, it's just like a painting. So that's one of my fun things to do with the. Jason asks, does Amaco have any test tiles of SM layered with PC? I didn't see much on the layering site. We don't. We have done some tests, like the mug that I was showing. We've done some tests, but most of the tests that we did, the satin mattes are very, very stable. I'm sorry, allergies have been getting to me. The satin mattes are super stable, and so most of the PCs don't really do a lot on top of them. They don't interact a lot, so most of the combinations were like, that's okay, it's nice. If you're using a satin matte and you want to have a little band of color, it can be great, but we didn't pursue it because it wasn't as exciting as some of the other combinations. So I'm going to set aside my smugs, and I'll work on that cake stand next week in glazing with in the Q and Amaco.
I think Rachel had a question about the cake stand. I'm not sure.
Is that, Rachel asks, do you have to do this on a glaze or can you do it on bisque and then cover in clear? You can, the smugs are actually meant to go on bisque and then cover with a clear glaze. And I have done that. There was I did a little vase a couple of weeks ago that I glazed with the smugs and with the chalks, and then I put a clear HF9 over it, and it came out great. I just like doing the satin mattes with the smugs over. It's kind of fun, and I feel like the colors come out a little bit brighter than they do underneath the satin matte clear or under other clears. I've also done it over Celadon Snow, and I've used the smugs under Celadon Mixing Clear, and they work quite well. They will be a little bit brighter when they're used on top. But if you want it to be a food safe surface, then put it on bisque and put your clear on top. Just make sure to make your colors really, really, really strong. So there's my toasted sage, and this is how I glazed. This is how I glazed it. So you can see that the toasted sage did move down, and I put 2 heavy coats on. So it'll have another coat, but it does flow a little bit just because the glaze itself is going to move. But it doesn't flow like right off the pot. But I love kind of the drag that happens here. So any other questions about satin mats? Those are my best tips and tricks. Make sure you have a good application. Fire to cone 5, 6. They're mixable. They're food safe. They're really super satiny and silky feeling. You can use them with underglazes, either underneath the clear, or you can go on top of you can put underglazes on top of the satin mat. And I can't think of other tips at the moment. So I'm going to let you all go. I am going to let this dry and get one more coat of the toasted sage directly on top, and then I'll fire it, and I'll fire it to cone 6, and I will bring it back next week for Q and Amaco, where you can ask me any questions that your heart desires, and I'll let you see how it came out. And I will also be working on the cake stand at the same time. Sarah asks, any tips to prevent silverware marks on a plate with SM white? You know, there are glazes that will get metal marks, and satin mats, even satin glazes, are known for that. I do see some metal marking inside my mug, down at the bottom where I stir with a spoon, but I don't have any tips. Unfortunately, if you're going to be using something like plates where you're using a lot of cutlery, you have to find a really hard glaze. And I think the hardest glaze that we have that I know of is the HF10 clear. That's going to be your best bet, and for avoiding cutlery marks. Rachel asks, the smugs over the satin are not food safe, only with clear or glaze over. So Rachel, we don't test for the smugs over the glaze. So I don't know if they're food safe or not, but that's why I say, since we don't test, that's when you should always use the clear glaze over and not do this technique. Do it on some other surface. If you're wanting to make like plates, use the underglaze and then put the satin matte clear over it, and that you know is like locked in. If you want to have it tested, that's great, but that's not part of our testing. So that's why I put it on things like the outside of my mug or on sculptural things. I just love it's a tea party. So I don't know if you can see that. So anyway, thank you guys for joining me today on my glaze journeys. And if you have other questions about glazing or about Amaco products or about anything, you know where to find me, and drop a comment. And thank you for sharing your day with me.